Ever get that feeling? That itch you just can't scratch. When someone with a little bit of power decides to make your life miserable for no damn reason. Now multiply that by 1,000. Add in a picturesque lake I'd enjoyed for over 30 years, and a homeowners association president who thought she was queen of a suburban kingdom, and you're starting to get the picture. They say you can't fight City Hall, or in this case the HOA. But sometimes if you're pushed far enough and you've got the right skills, you can fight back. I ended up buying an entire damn house just to reclaim access to my own lake. Sounds insane, right? Stick around. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because this tale of HOA warfare, meticulous planning, and sweet, hard-earned vindication is one for the books. It all started, as these things often do, with a change in leadership. Lakeside Meadows had always been a quiet, no-nonsense kind of place. We paid our dues, kept our lawns tidy, and those of us whose backyards touched the man-made lake enjoyed unfenced, peaceful access. My house, one of the originals, had a backyard that sloped gently down to what we all called the Founder's Path. It wasn't official, no deed, no sign, no gate, just a worn trail used for decades by families heading down to fish, swim, or watch the sun melt into the water. Then came Brenda Wilkins. She moved in 5 years ago, into one of the newer, bigger homes across the development. Brenda, bless her cold heart, didn't see the HOA as a collective for community upkeep. She saw it as her personal fiefdom. Within a year, she'd strong-armed her way into the HOA presidency, campaigning on vague promises of restoring property values and enforcing the covenants. In Brenda speak, that meant making everyone miserable with rules no one asked for. She was a woman of a certain age, always dressed like she was headed to a board meeting, even on Saturday mornings. Her blonde hair was lacquered into a helmet that didn't move in the wind, her expressions ranged from disapproval to outright disdain, and her smile, that smug little smirk, made you want to check if you'd accidentally shown up in pajama pants. She drove a jet black Escalade that looked like a hearse for dreams. My name's Arthur, by the way. Retired land surveyor. I've spent my life reading maps, understanding property lines, and navigating the dense legalese of easements. And Brenda? She was about to find out she'd picked the wrong guy to mess with. The signs were small at first. Literally. Laminated notices around common areas. No unauthorized use of common property. All recreational activities must be HOA approved. Then came the behavior, Brenda cornering old Mrs. Gable about her bird bath, measuring Jim Henderson's azaleas with a tape measure that seemed to appear out of thin air. But her real fixation? The Founder's Path. She called it an unauthorized encroachment, a liability nightmare. I tried to reason with her. I showed her my old survey maps from when the development was first laid out, proof of the original intent for lake access. Nothing official, sure, but enough to show this path had always been part of the spirit of the place. She just smiled that smile. "Mr. Davies," she'd say, her voice dripping with faux charm, "while I appreciate your historical perspective, the covenants are quite clear. The HOA is responsible for common land, and unregulated access simply can't be tolerated in this day and age. Insurance, you understand." Oh, I understood. I understood she was on a power trip. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning. I was enjoying my coffee on the patio when I heard hammering. I walked down to the edge of my yard, and there it was. A crew of workers, supervised by Brenda, clipboard in hand, erecting a 6-foot chain-link fence right along the technical boundary of the HOA's common land. Right where the path ran. It cut us off. Just like that. I marched up to her. "Brenda, what the hell do you think you're doing?" She didn't even flinch. "Just ensuring compliance, Arthur. Enhancing security. We can't have just anyone wandering onto HOA land now, can we? This has been our path for 30 years. She tilted her head. "Unapproved path," she corrected. "Anyone who wants to enjoy the lake can drive around to the official HOA boat ramp. It's only a few minutes away." The official ramp? A concrete slab beside a parking lot on the far side of the lake. Ugly. Inconvenient. Especially for those of us who lived right here. This wasn't about policy. It was personal. That fence wasn't just a barrier. It was a challenge. The neighborhood buzzed with outrage, but most folks were older, tired, resigned. Complaints were filed, calls made, but Brenda just pointed to the rules and moved on. The fence stayed. Tall, steel, and smug. That night, I sat in my study, surrounded by old plats and legal descriptions. My surveyor brain clicked back into gear. Brenda thought she'd slammed the door. But I knew something about doors, about boundaries, loopholes, and hidden clauses. If no door existed, maybe I could build one. Or better yet, buy it. I started digging. County tax records, original developer plans, decades-old plat maps. I pulled late nights combing through dusty archives and digital blueprints, the kind of deep research only a very stubborn man with a lot of time and a very personal vendetta could commit to. Brenda didn't let up. She pushed through ridiculous rules, banning garden gnomes, regulating mailbox paint, even proposing a list of approved flower species. It was suburban dictatorship. But people were too worn down to fight. Not me. While the neighborhood cowered, I got to work. And buried deep in those records, somewhere between a forgotten utility easement and an overlooked parcel line, I found my way in. Because you don't win against a bully by yelling louder. You win by knowing the terrain better than they ever will. And Brenda Wilkins? She had no idea what was coming. The HOA owned a strip of land encircling the lake, designated as common recreational space. Brenda's new fence ran flush along the outer boundary of that strip, effectively sealing the entire area off like a fortress. The access point she'd so smugly mentioned, the boat ramp and a tiny parking lot, was as expected on the far side of the lake. But as I sifted through an old, beautifully hand-drawn subdivision plat from 1978, something caught my eye. A tiny, nearly invisible notation, an afterthought really, on one particular lot that abutted the HOA's common land near the lake's western edge. Lot 47. It wasn't a premium lakefront property. In fact, its primary frontage was on a quiet cul-de-sac, with the rear lot line backing directly onto the common strip Brenda had fenced in. And there, faintly sketched in pencil, was a dotted line marked PD Access Easement. A pedestrian right-of-way, from the back of Lot 47 into the common area. My heart skipped. That was very interesting. Modern digital maps had long since omitted these kinds of subtle historical details. I cross-referenced Lot 47 with current ownership records. Owner, James Henderson. The same Jim Henderson whose azaleas Brenda had once infamously measured with her trusty tape. A quiet, elderly widower, one of the neighborhood's original homeowners. I vaguely remembered seeing an old, sagging wooden gate tucked behind the overgrown hedge at the back of his yard. Could that be it? Could that gate, forgotten and weathered by time, be the key? Excitement buzzed in my chest. I took a casual stroll past Henderson's home. His backyard was wide and slightly overgrown. Sure enough, through the gaps in the ligustrum hedge, I caught a glimpse of the gate. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years, almost swallowed by vines. But it was there. Now I needed proof. I headed to the county records office, a second home to me during my surveyor days. Hours passed in a haze of microfilm reels, dusty deed books, and scrolling through decades-old records. And then I found it. In the original 1979 deed for Lot 47. Together with a non-exclusive pedestrian easement for access to the community lake recreational area, said easement being 5 feet in width along the westernmost portion of the rear property line of said Lot 47, for the benefit of the owner, his heirs and assigns. Bingo. This wasn't a casual shortcut. It was a recorded, legally binding easement. And heirs and assigns meant it ran with the land, automatically transferred to any future owner. Brenda's shiny new fence didn't and couldn't override a private, deeded easement. Her fortress had a back door, and whoever owned Lot 47 held the key. I nearly laughed out loud in the middle of the archives room. The irony was delicious. Brenda, in her zeal to keep the unwashed masses away from her lake, had unknowingly preserved a private entrance for one lone homeowner. Or, if I played my cards right, for me. I made crisp copies of the deed and the plat map, the paper warm in my hands like a golden ticket. The idea took root instantly. What if I became the assign? What if I bought Lot 47? Yes, it was a little crazy. Buying a whole house just to use a gate? But it wasn't just about access anymore. It was about bypassing Brenda, sidestepping her entire petty empire using old-school property law she couldn't twist or rewrite. I needed a second opinion. So I called my old friend and occasional golf buddy Tom Albright, a retired real estate attorney with a keen eye for legal nuance and an outright disdain for HOA politics. We met over coffee at his place. I laid everything out on his dining table, maps, copies, the works. Tom listened quietly, occasionally smirking as I described Brenda's reign of terror. When I got to lot 47 in the easement, he leaned back, eyebrows raised, a slow grin stretching across his face. "Arthur," he said, steepling his fingers, "you magnificent, devious bastard. This isn't a workaround. This is a tactical nuke in a squabble over garden gnomes." He flipped through the documents. Easement looks airtight. It's recorded, it's specific, it runs with the land. Her fence doesn't touch this. If you own lot 47, that gate becomes your private entrance to her gated lake. We ran through the hypotheticals. Could the HOA claim the easement had been abandoned? Unlikely. Non-use alone doesn't void a deeded easement unless formally extinguished. Could they try to buy it out? Maybe, but they'd have to negotiate with the owner. And if that owner was me? The price would be steep. Very steep. So, Tom said, eyes glinting. The real question is Mr. Henderson selling? That was the million-dollar question, or more accurately, the several $100,000 question. But the plan was in motion now. No longer just an idea. Brenda Wilkins thought she ruled the lake. But she had no clue that a quiet old cartographer was about to buy a backdoor into her kingdom. The first step was delicate, approaching Mr. Henderson. We weren't close. A few nods in passing, maybe a wave if we saw each other gardening. I knew he was a man in his late 80s and from what I'd heard, not a fan of the HOA's new direction. But I didn't want to come off as a shark circling his property, or worse, as someone exploiting a lonely old man. So I went with something simple. Neighborly. I baked a fresh loaf of my wife's legendary sourdough, wrapped it up warm, and walked over one sunny afternoon. He answered the door, surprised but smiling. "Mr. Henderson," I said. "Arthur Davies, from down the street. My wife baked extra bread today. Thought you might enjoy a loaf." His expression softened immediately. "Well now, that's mighty kind of you, Arthur. Come in, won't you?" His home was tidy, filled with old photos, books, and the lemony scent of furniture polish. We chatted about the weather, the old days in Lakeside Meadows, and how the neighborhood used to feel like a community. Eventually, gently, I steered the conversation toward Brenda's new regime. "It's a shame about the lake access," I said, sipping tea. "A lot of us on the old side feel like we've lost something important." He nodded slowly, a shadow crossing his face. "You're not wrong, Arthur. Feels like the place changed and not for the better." I smiled. "Funny thing, I was looking through some old maps the other day. I kept my voice casual. Brenda Wilkins certainly has her strong opinions about how things should be run." Mr. Henderson sighed, a long, tired sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his bones. "Tell me about it," he muttered. "That woman measured my prize-winning azaleas, you know. Claimed they were half an inch over the new foliage height ordinance." He shook his head in disbelief. "I've lived here 40 years. Never heard of such nonsense. And the fence cutting people off from the lake?" He looked out the window. "It just doesn't sit right." That was my opening. "Actually, Mr. Henderson," I said, shifting slightly in my seat, "I've been looking into the original easements and property lines around the lake. Your lot's unique. Did you know it has a deeded pedestrian access easement? Right through your backyard onto the HOA common land." He turned to me, a flicker of memory lighting up in his eyes. "An easement? Yes, I think I remember something about that. From when Martha and I first bought the place. There's an old gate back there, hasn't been touched in 20 years at least. Practically disappeared into the brush." "Well," I said, leaning in slightly, "that easement? Still perfectly valid. Recorded. Legal. Brenda's fence doesn't change that. That old gate is your private entrance to the lake, by right." He sat with that thought, eyes narrowing. "So, That busybody Brenda can't stop me from using it? If I felt like it? Not legally, no, I said. That easement belongs to Lot 47. And as long as you own this house, it belongs to you. A spark ignited behind his tired eyes, subtle but unmistakable. Not just surprise. Defiance. In the weeks that followed, I visited Mr. Henderson more frequently. Sometimes with coffee, sometimes just to talk. We spoke about his late wife, his grandkids, and his quiet frustration with how the neighborhood had changed under Brenda's iron rule. He seemed lonely and glad for the company. And as we talked, one thing became clear. He wasn't just annoyed with the HOA. He was done. One afternoon, almost in passing, he mentioned he'd been thinking about moving, maybe closer to his daughter out of state. But the idea of realtors, showings, and the stress of selling was overwhelming at his age. The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just about my access to the lake. It could be something mutually beneficial. Mr. Henderson, I said one afternoon, careful with my words, this may sound a little unorthodox. But given everything you've said, your interest in moving and my particular interest in that lake access your property holds, would you consider selling the house directly to me? No listings. No agents. Just a clean, private sale. Of course, I'd offer you fair market value. He stared out the window toward the azaleas Brenda had once targeted. Then he turned back, a shrewd look in his eye. You really want that lake back, don't you, Arthur? I do, I admitted. And more than that, I think it's time someone reminded President Wilkins that she doesn't own this neighborhood. A slow smile crept across his face. Martha would have liked you, he said. She'd have hated what this place has become. And I have to admit, I'd take a certain satisfaction in seeing that woman get a surprise. He paused, then nodded. All right, Arthur. Let's talk numbers. If you can make me a fair offer, enough to let me move near my grandkids without too much hassle, then yes. I think we've got a deal. And I'd love to see that old gate put to good use again. Especially if it ruffles Brenda's feathers. The negotiations were smooth and amicable. I brought in Tom Albright to handle the legal side and make sure everything was buttoned up. We confirmed the title, the easement, and worked out a price that was generous to Mr. Henderson but just within reach for me. It meant dipping into savings I'd planned to use for a long-postponed trip to Scotland, a painful sacrifice. It's a bitter pill, my wife said, watching me sign the documents. Spending all this money to get back what was morally yours to begin with. Then she smiled. But I haven't seen you this alive in years. So go for it. So I did. While Brenda remained blissfully unaware, now doubling down on her tyranny with bigger, more aggressive signs, private HOA property, trespassers will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, by order of the HOA president. I quietly handled the closing. She even started patrolling the fence in her black Escalade, creeping past backyards like some sort of suburban warden. One afternoon, while I was clearing brush behind Mr. Henderson's property, with his full permission since we were under contract, she rolled down her window and called out, "Everything all right over there, Arthur? Just admiring Jim's rustic charm?" Her voice dripped with condescension. I smiled, innocent as a choir boy. "Just enjoying the fresh air, Brenda?" If only she knew. On closing day, Mr. Henderson handed me the house keys, and one more, smaller, older key from the back of a kitchen drawer. "Haven't seen this in decades," he said with a chuckle. "Pretty sure it's for the old gate. If not, well, I figure a man like you will know what to do." I shook his hand. "Thank you, Jim. For everything. I hope you enjoy your time with your family." "Oh, I will," he said. Then with a sly grin, "And you enjoy that lake. Be sure to give Brenda my regards." And just like that, I became the proud, if slightly financially strained, owner of Lot 47. The house itself was modest, a bit outdated, but sturdy. And most importantly, it came with a gate. A forgotten, overgrown little door in the back fence. And on the other side of it, a private entrance to Brenda Wilkins' pride and joy. She had no idea what was coming. I hadn't planned on moving into Lot 47. My actual home was just a few streets away. This wasn't about real estate. This was a strategic acquisition, a very expensive key to a very specific lock. Before I even transferred the utilities, I walked straight to the backyard. The old wooden gate was still there, half hidden in the ligustrum hedge, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. It was secured with an old-fashioned padlock. I pulled out the key Jim Henderson had given me. It was stiff with age, but after some coaxing and a little wiggle, it slid in. I turned it slowly. Click. The shackle popped free. My heart leapt. I pushed the gate open. It creaked, a tired protest after years of disuse, but it opened. Beyond it, neatly mowed grass, sunlight on water, and Brenda's fortress-like chain-link fence just a few feet away. Only now I was on this side of it. I had done it. I had bought my way back to the lake. The delicious secrecy of it made my pulse race. I relocked the gate, then spent the afternoon clearing the path, trimming back the hedge, and oiling the hinges until it swung smoothly. The reveal had to be clean, quiet, devastating, and very, very public. The following weeks became a masterclass in restraint. I played the long game. On weekends, I spent a little time at Lot 47 doing light maintenance. Mowing, hedge trimming, fixing up the gate with new boards and a coat of subtle brown stain. The padlock still matched Jim's old key perfectly. Naturally, my activity didn't go unnoticed. Brenda, ever vigilant, occasionally passed by in her black Escalade. I always waved. One day she actually stopped, window rolling down with a practiced sneer. "So, Arthur," she said, "I hear you bought poor old Mr. Henderson's place. Planning on flipping it? Trying to cash in on the property values I've been improving?" Her tone was syrupy with self-importance. "Just a small investment, Brenda," I said, smiling. "Lovely little spot. Very close to the lake amenities, once you can get to them." I glanced meaningfully toward the far-off official boat ramp. She sniffed and drove off, clearly unimpressed. If only she knew. Tom Albright, my lawyer friend, was nearly vibrating with anticipation during our weekly coffee chats. "You have to make it theatrical," he said. "Make it hurt. The right moment will come." And then, it did. In her infinite hunger for attention, Brenda announced the first ever Lakeside Meadows Lake Appreciation Day, an HOA-sponsored event held on the very land she had fenced off from half the community. There'd be hot dogs, a bouncy castle for the kids, and, naturally, a special address from President Brenda Wilkins herself on responsible stewardship and the enhancement of our community's natural assets. The hypocrisy was almost poetic. She was throwing a party on land she'd taken from us, and she was doing it with a microphone. This would be my stage. The day arrived. Bright, warm, cloudless. I had coffee on my own patio, staring at the lake I could no longer reach, at least not from here. By early afternoon, I saw people heading toward the far side of the lake, using the official entrance. Families, strollers, lawn chairs. I waited. Let it build. At 1 p.m. sharp, just as the event was in full swing, I made my move. Khaki shorts, polo shirt, fishing hat. I slung my old tackle box over my shoulder and carried my rod like it was just another Saturday. I drove to Lot 47, parked in the driveway, walked through the quiet house, and stepped into the backyard. I could hear music, laughter, a PA system crackling to life. And then, Brenda's voice, amplified and smug, beginning her speech. I walked to the gate. Inserted the key. Click. The gate swung open smoothly. I stepped through. From my private property directly onto the very land Brenda had claimed as her private kingdom. I crossed the neatly trimmed grass toward the lake, about 50 yards from the little stage where Brenda was mid-address, her back to me. A few heads turned. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A child pointed. Brenda paused mid-sentence, confused. She turned. And saw me. Her mouth fell open. The microphone slipped in her grip, emitting a squawk of feedback. The entire event froze. "Arthur Davies," she screeched. "What in the Sam Hill do you think you're doing? How did you get in here? This area is for authorized residents. You're trespassing." The crowd turned to watch. I simply smiled, leaned my fishing rod against a nearby tree, and opened my tackle box like I was setting up for a casual afternoon by the water. "Afternoon, Brenda," I called out cheerfully. "Lovely day for it, isn't it? Figured I'd try my luck. Base should be biting near those reeds." "Trespassing?" she barked, her face flushing a remarkable shade of puce. I'll have you removed. Security? Oh wait, we don't have security because this is supposed to be a secure area. She was unraveling. Visibly. Her lackeys, nervous Gary and wide-eyed Carol, started toward me. Mr. Davies, Gary began, voice uncertain, President Wilkins is right. This is an HOA sanctioned. The fence. I interrupted, nodding at it. Yes, quite the statement piece. Really keeps people out. Most people. I turned and gestured toward the gate, still open behind me. But this gate? I said. This is on my property. Lot 47. Which I now own. I reached into my pocket and held up the old key, letting it glint in the sun. And this key? Opens that gate. The silence was profound. Then someone in the crowd snorted. Someone else chuckled. And then, like dominoes, laughter began to ripple across the lawn. Brenda looked like she might explode. It provides direct deeded access to this lovely common area, I said, my voice calm but carrying, as per the original plat and recorded easement, 1979 if memory serves. I looked straight at Brenda. Been meaning to do some fishing. She was sputtering. Your property? Your key? That's preposterous. This is HOA land. I had that fence installed myself. You did indeed, I agreed pleasantly. Right along the HOA boundary. Very official looking. But you overlooked one small detail, a legally recorded pedestrian access easement, benefiting Lot 47. I paused for effect. Which now belongs to me. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That easement gives the owner of Lot 47 the right to access this land on foot. And that owner, I held up the old key with a gentle jingle, is me. I have the deed, the survey, the recorded plat map, and a very good lawyer, if you'd like to discuss it further. I let the name drop like a stone into a still pond. Tom Albright sends his regards. The effect was immediate. Brenda paled. Tom had a reputation in these parts for chewing up bureaucrats and bullies alike. Around us, a few longtime residents, those who'd endured Brenda's rule, were trying and failing to suppress grins. Some chuckled openly. The tension was cracking. This is an outrage. Brenda finally shrieked, trembling with rage. You can't just buy a house to get around HOA rules. Actually, I said, keeping my tone casual, I can. And I did. I turned toward the lake, then looked back at the crowd. You built a wall, I said. I bought the door. Then, with theatrical calm, I cast my fishing line into the lake, unbaited of course. I wasn't here to fish. Not yet. Now if you'll excuse me, I said, I believe President Wilkins was in the middle of an important speech on lake stewardship. Please don't let me interrupt. The meltdown was glorious. Brenda stammered, gestured wildly, appealed to her board, who were now backing away like they didn't know her. She even pulled out her phone, threatening to call the police. Please do, I said lightly. I'd be happy to show them my deed and the county plat maps. Got copies in my tackle box, actually. She faltered. The calmness in my voice, the name drop of Tom, the legal foundation, all of it hit at once. Her lake appreciation day was over, imploded by a single gate and one very inconvenient property transaction. She mumbled something about audacity, and calling the attorney before fleeing the stage, a turquoise blur of rage. The party atmosphere vanished, replaced with murmurs and wide-eyed disbelief. Neighbors came over, shaking my hand, some wiping tears of laughter. Arthur, you legend, old Mr. Peterson cackled. Haven't seen Brenda that shade of purple since someone planted petunias instead of pansies. I looked over at the fence, still standing, still imposing. But now, a perfectly legal hole had been punched right through it. My hole. My gate. And Brenda Wilkins now knew, with dawning horror, that her iron grip on lake access was gone for good. The aftermath. Brenda tried to fight back, of course. She called the HOA attorney. Word spread quickly, it always does in neighborhoods like ours, that after reviewing the documents I'd cheerfully handed over, Tom Albright included, the attorney told her in no uncertain terms. She didn't have a legal leg to stand on. The easement was ironclad. My ownership of Lot 47 was fully legitimate. My access was absolute. Her only option? Try to buy the easement from me. And we all knew my price. Somewhere between hell freezes over and not in your lifetime. She tried to rally the HOA board. Called an emergency meeting about security risks and unauthorized access. I showed up, now a stakeholder in common land access, and sat near the front, composed and ready. The meeting was tense. Brenda, still fuming, painted me as a saboteur exploiting loopholes. Mr. Davies, she snapped, pointing at me, has deliberately circumvented the clear intent of the HOA's security measures for personal gain. Before I could respond, old Mrs. Gable, the one whose birdbath had been cited for excessive whimsy, stood up. Intent? Brenda, for 30 years that lake was for everyone. You're the one who changed everything. Arthur just found a smart way to bring some common sense back. Applause broke out. More residents spoke up. About the endless violation notices. The joyless tyranny. The suffocating micromanagement. The meeting stopped feeling like a board discussion and started feeling like a mutiny. Brenda looked shell-shocked. She made one last attempt. What about security? She barked. How do we know who Mr. Davies will let through his gate? I smiled. Brenda, my gate is on my private property. Who I allow through it is entirely my business. However, I let the silence stretch. I'm a reasonable man. And I know a number of long-standing neighbors lost access they'd enjoyed for decades. I'm considering extending access to a select few. Not an open-door policy, just a small gesture of goodwill. The implication was clear. I would decide who got in now, not the HOA and certainly not Brenda. That drove her mad. But it also drove a wedge between her and her shrinking support. The quiet collapse. She didn't recover. Over the next few weeks, I met privately with a handful of the original homeowners who'd lost access to the lake. We agreed, in formal keys, quiet terms. No parties. Just quiet use of what had once been theirs. The sight of Mr. Peterson walking his grandkids down to the lake with his fishing gear brought me more satisfaction than anything I'd ever pulled from the water. Brenda's last-ditch efforts failed. New rules, condemnation threats, legal challenges. All toothless. Her fence still stood. But now it stood as a monument to her downfall, a wall with a hole in it wide enough for the truth to walk through. The following spring she didn't run for re-election. In fact, she didn't even attend the meeting. A few months later, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. She was moving to a private, gated community across town, where I assume she hoped every gate was still under her control. The day her moving truck pulled away, a soft cheer rolled through lakeside meadows. Epilogue. I didn't sell my old house. I kept Lot 47 as my quiet lakeside retreat. Some afternoons I'd sit by the gate, book in hand, a satisfied smile on my face. It became a symbol in the neighborhood, a reminder that no one is untouchable, and even the most stubborn wall can be breached with a little patience, research, and the right key. The HOA softened under new leadership. The aesthetic tyranny faded. The community breathed again. And so, that's how I bought a house. Not for the kitchen, not for the view, but for a rusty old gate with a very old right-of-way. Sometimes the best way to beat a wall is to legally walk around it.